my technology skills here.
Exactly. So thank you. So I want to introduce Caitlin, who is the director of Key Culture and is with us today to talk about sustainable climate control in museums. We are very excited to have you with us today, Caitlin. Thank you so much for joining us. And I would like to kick things off by asking you to please tell us, for those who don't know, a little bit more about a kind of introduction to you and Key Culture and how it, your origin story and how it all started, and then we can kind of get into the topic at hand.
Amazing. Well, first of all, Annika, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here as always. I love your webinar series, and I'm always especially honored when I get to be a guest. And we always have such fun conversations, so the time seems to fly by.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone who doesn't know me, hi, nice to see you all. Excited to be here. I'm Caitlin Southwick. As Annika mentioned, I'm the founder and executive director of Key Culture. We are an international nonprofit organization working on the nexus of sustainability and culture. So we provide programs, tools, and support systems for cultural practitioners around the globe to help transition culture to a sustainable sector so that we can be leaders and advocates for sustainability within our audiences, our communities, and the world at large.
Yay!
So, just like something to do on a Tuesday. It's quite
right, just a small matter.
It's quite easy.
and I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you there, Caitlin, because as you are well aware, I'm sure, COP27 is going on right now.
It is. I'm speaking digitally there tomorrow.
Well, okay. So for anyone in the audience who would like my recommendation, I highly recommend that you check out We Don't Have Time, which is a platform that both Key Culture and Articheck are partners with. It is a sustainability focused social media platform. And they're doing live broadcasts of COP27. They're the ones that gave me the opportunity to speak at COP26 last year in Glasgow.
And they're the ones giving me the opportunity to speak at COP27 this year.
Oh, great. Well, there you go.
Exactly. So you read my mind.
Precisely. And so I just through my LinkedIn feed yesterday, I was like having my coffee break. I was like tuning in for a sec to their broadcast. And I happened to come upon a discussion with a television producer for a Netflix series about sustainability, but it was like aimed at basically, not preaching to the choir, but getting more people on board that are not so interested or aware of sustainability topics and kind of, what do they call it? Edutainment.
Yeah,
edutainment series for aimed at people that might not know much about sustainability, which is so great to see, that happening. Obviously, this kind of programming, environmental programming, needs to happen on kind of every channel, every level in culture and media and everything. And, that's the only way that we're going. And they talked again about the need. And I've heard this said many times by sustainability experts that we must feel the need. Like we now kind of all accept scientifically that this is happening, but not everyone has accepted feeling the need to change and envisioning how to change and having hope and moving towards that change. So that's like the next step that is critical and that culture can help with advocating for, I believe.
Yeah, and I think it's not just feeling the need. I think it's feeling the ownership. It's feeling like you have something that you can do. I mean, one of the things that I noticed, as a conservator, I felt that I had absolutely no, horse in the race. That was not something that was completely separated from my day job. So what could I do? So I think that it's also a matter of, ownership and feeling that we're a part of a movement and something that's going to have a really big impact. And of course, that's a really great opportunity we're talking about today with climate control. So that's, well, I'm jumping ahead, of course, but Yeah, I think as you said, Annika, it's so important that we're making sure. I always say that sustainability is like this, it needs to come from every direction simultaneously, grassroots up,
Totally.
top down, inside out, outside in. It needs to happen everywhere at the same time. And one of the revelations I had early on in my um, foray into this nexus of sustainability and culture was a lot of times, people are saying, okay, well, it's the top 1% that really is polluting so much, and all the billionaires flying around with their private jets and stuff. And then you've got, art and the leisure activity of museums. And I'm like, well, wait a second, like, we have the audience attention that who we need to be targeting. So we really need to up our ante here, because obviously we're trying to also bring in diverse audiences and communicate with larger publics, but we already have this audience in our back pocket. So why are we not engaging at that level, like very specifically? But it's once again,
Totally.
every angle all at the same time. So it's great. And I've been so excited to see what's going on in the film and television industry. There's this huge movement that is looking at reducing or eliminating single-use plastics from the screen.
Yeah.
And like things like that, it's so subconscious, we don't even realize it. But if you watch TV and you see them constantly reaching for plastic water bottles rather than a reusable one, it's just ingrained that that's societal norms. So that's also the power we have as museums is, how does history teach us about what we can learn for the future, but how does our, past connect with our present, and how does our present
Totally.
connect with each other?
Absolutely. And I usually, you know, compare it to IT, right? Like not so long ago, back in the day, people would have like an IT guy, right? And
Mhm.
they were in charge of all things IT. And now we're even, we've got to the point recently where we have like a sustainability person, and we feel like and that is a good milestone. But what we need to get to next is the idea, like we have now with digital skills, everyone needs to have digital skills. You cannot
Exactly.
operate in the world any longer without any digital skills.
Yeah.
So, we need to think of sustainability, I think, in the same way. Like you said, it has to be kind of everywhere all the time, top of mind.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And it is sustainability skills are now marketable skills. And it's really exciting to see that that's, in demand also in the cultural world. It's, if you can say, I've got training in, what decolonization is, then all of a sudden you go to the top of the list of the candidates. So it's getting there, and that's really cool. But yeah,
Absolutely. So back to the origin story.
back
Go.
to the origin story. Oh yeah, me. Yeah, so I'm a conservator, in case we didn't pick up on that. By training, I was a stone conservator for 8 years and loved my job. I mean, I literally had the coolest job in the world. I'll breeze through this for those of you who already know me and you've heard this story a million times. Um, I've done research at the Getty. I've worked at the Uffizi galleries. I've worked at the Vatican museums. I was part of the first team of conservators to go down to Rapa Nui and work on the Moai statues. So I really had the coolest job ever, and I loved what I was doing, and I felt very passionate about it. I became a conservator because I wanted to preserve our cultural heritage for future generations to enjoy the same way that I did. And the problem though is that I'm a mountain girl from Colorado. I love this beautiful planet we live on, and standing on the beaches of Rapa Nui, pouring toxic chemicals over the Moai and watching it run out into the ground and into the ocean just didn't sit right with me. And I realized that sustainability wasn't just about doing good, but as my good friend Henry McGee from Curating Tomorrow always says, it's about doing good without doing harm.
Mm.
And that just resonated so deeply with me. And as Annika was pointing out earlier, in the cultural sector, we have this huge opportunity to be leaders for sustainability, and everyone wants to. I mean, I've never met a single person who said, oh, sustainability is really not something that I care about. We all want to be more sustainable. It's just a matter of how. And so that was the whole point behind founding Key Culture, was to provide that how, to make sustainability easy, accessible, to look at it from an international lens with a holistic approach, and to solve these problems in a collective way.
Great. It's very important and laudable work you do, Caitlin. Thank you so much for taking that decision. I think it's really an important one. And I too am a conservator. And I also, had that kind of moment where when I was protesting with Extinction Rebellion in 2019 at Trafalgar Square. And, you know, we were right in front of the National Gallery. And I just thought, you guys have no clue what a big carbon culprit we've got behind us here at the National Gallery. And, you know, how unnecessary. And I was thinking about buildings and that moment. And when I decided to, you know, to try and do more than it just be a body in a protest, and, you know, try and help through technology to lead the industry, be one of the leaders in transitioning to more sustainable practices. And, you know, that both of us having those kind of aha moments is what led us here today. So I'm really happy to be here with you talking about this. So let's get to it now. With Key Culture, I want you to share with us a little bit about, you know, what the makeup of Key Culture is like. Give us an introduction to, you know, who you work with, what your model is, how that's all working.
I mean, basically what we try to do at Key Culture is fulfill the needs of the cultural sector in terms of what the wants are on sustainability. So we started out by creating step-by-step guides on how to be sustainable called the Key Books. And what makes those unique is they're co-created by sustainability experts and cultural professionals. So it really looked at translating the sustainability jargon into something very applicable and understandable for cultural professionals. And we released 3 last year, which included energy, materials, and social sustainability. This year, we've been working on the next iterations, which will include education and engagement, exhibitions, and sustainable tourism. And we are currently actually working on translating the existing key books and our upcoming key books into a website, so that it can be more interactive and engaging, and we can also update them more regularly rather than having them be PDFs that need to be, you know, re-downloaded every time there's a new one. So also carbon footprint part. So yeah, so those were kind of the first thing, but of course, as we know, you can lead a horse to water, but sometimes it's harder to get to the horse to drink. And for me, what I found was that, you know, you can give someone a handbook on how to be sustainable, but at some point you're going to have questions. You're going to need more support. You're going to need to see how it's done. And that's where the Key Futures program came into play. So Key Futures is an international coaching and training network. We provide weekly courses for our champions. Sometimes they're workshops, sometimes they're trainings, sometimes they're networking events, but weekly opportunities for you to dig into sustainability. And then in addition to the courses, we have an international network that we curate. We have created a tailored bespoke online platform for sharing best practices, as well as facilitating networking and connections internationally. And then we also have our coaching component, where all of our champions are paired with a local coach to address specific local context, to work in local languages, and also to mentor and guide you through your own journey, through developing your journey if need be, as also for taking action. And yeah, our Key Futures program launched in January this year. So we're almost a year old and already expanding wildly. So we have over 100 institutions around the world joining, as well as numerous freelance individual curators, conservators. And we also work across the board with various with various stakeholders, including municipalities, foundations, et cetera. But we have museums such as the Smithsonian and the Estonian Museum of Art, the National Museum of Lagos in Nigeria, the Museo de Arte Moderno in Buenos Aires. So a really international group. And
yeah, we were very proud to participate as well in the pilot program. That was really
now
great.
partners, which is wonderful.
Yeah, for sure. So I think one thing I want to, I mean, I briefly mentioned it when we first joined very informally, but I'm going to call it out again now because it's very important. And that is the energy crisis, right? We have an impending energy crisis, as everyone here will be well aware. And so most people who have joined us today or will be watching this video recording in future are about to be in for a massive increase in their energy bill. So there hasn't been a better time to seriously consider adopting the green Bizoid protocols, right? It's a very timely topic, very near and dear to the wallet at the moment, which means that hopefully it's going to be accelerated and prioritized. And so I think that this is why, right, you have kind of chosen this moment to have a conference and a program and really focus efforts on helping the industry to adopt these protocols. As I mean, maybe we should start by calling out the fact that these protocols were created in 2008, I believe it was, and they were adopted and endorsed by the National Museum Directors Council here in the UK. Shortly thereafter, Sir Nicholas Sirota was a big champion of them. I know that there was a lot of institutions involved in the research that went into them, the V&A, the National Gallery, the Louvre. It was a big deal. It was launched, and yet, sadly, very few institutions to date have actually adopted them fully.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, should we talk for a moment about why that is, what the challenges are of the relaxed climate? Maybe actually the very first thing we should do is to kind of define what these Bizoid protocols actually are and do. You want to?
I think, to be honest with you, this is the whole problem. First of all, you say that, sadly, so many institutions haven't adopted it. Well, the problem is actually we don't know. We don't know who's adopted it and who hasn't, because there's no transparency around it. And
that's true. I'm just speaking from anecdotal evidence, really, of nobody I've spoken to and have pointedly asked can say yes.
That's really interesting. And I think last time we were on a webinar together, we polled the audience. And I think this was COVID time, so there was like 250 people in the audience. And I think 50% of the people said that they didn't even know what their climate control conditions were. And then of the 50% who said that they did know, I think 20% said that they had adopted BIZO or similar. So it was a small number. And actually, so I think I'd love to get into kind of the history about this and some of the stickiness. I mean, this is really one of the problems we have as a cultural sector right now, especially in the climate control conversation, is that we have this really horribly entangled knot of spider web. And and I think it's spider web because it's sticky and it's thin and it may be strong as well. And it's this kind of big fat mess that we've gotten ourselves into. And I'm hoping that over the next few months, collectively, we can get ourselves out of this. And so this is, what we're going to be talking about today is the approach that we're taking in addressing this in a holistic international way. But
this applies, sorry to interrupt, but this applies to sustainability issues in general, right? It's a very good metaphor for kind of the world crisis problems, as people say, oh, well, sure, I can buy a reusable coffee cup, but, going much beyond that, there's, it's hard for me because I have a car and I use petrol, and the infrastructure isn't there, the this or the that, there's all these, it's complicated. It's a complicated problem, and that's why it hasn't been solved like that easy peasy before now. Yes, we fully acknowledge, like a spider's web, it is a sticky, strong, complicated web of trickiness, and yet the solutions are there. And we can.
Exactly. And that's one of the things I think that people misconstrue about sustainability, is that there's nothing we can do about it. But the fact of the matter is that the solutions are there, and we have everything we need to live in a sustainable planet and in a sustainable society. We just have to make some changes.
Yeah.
And that can be scary, but I think if we do it together, it's less scary. And I think that, it's, as you mentioned, it's all of these things intertwined. And so it's systemic problems. And sometimes you can't help it. For example, I've made the choice this year to travel only by train within Europe. And that is great. And that reduces my carbon footprint by a huge amount. But sometimes I get on a train that's diesel powered and there's nothing I can do about it because that's the choice of the train company. And,
Yeah.
I can advocate for it. I can lobby for it. I can, write them emails saying switch over, write the, tag the European Commission in my Instagram post and demand that they put a train between Spain and Portugal, which is totally something I did, by the way.
Good, good.
But it can feel really overwhelming because once again, individual agency can feel limiting. I don't think it is at all. I think that every single individual person can make like the biggest impact ever. I mean, look at Greta. She always says this too, but I think that there are certain situations, and climate control is a really great example of this, where you kind of have this triangle of pointing fingers. It's, the museum directors say, well, we can't make the changes because of insurance companies and loan agreements. Insurance companies say, well, we listen to the conservators, and the conservators say, well, our museum directors are telling us what to do.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of saying like, wait a second, well, whose decision is this? And can we all sit down and talk about it and get on the same page?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that, if we actually take, circling back to your question, if we take a look at what the actual parameters are, what the guidelines are, where the guidelines even came from. I mean, we can go back to Gary, and poor Gary. I feel like I am personally guilty of throwing him under the bus, but I've been obviously like in preparation for this conference and with all of the different programming that we're doing right now around climate control. I've been doing a ton of research on this, and it's not Gary's fault. He wasn't the one who, said that this was the end all be all. And also, he wasn't the one who kind of came up with this idea in the first place. It was requested, HVAC systems were coming into style and museums were putting them in. And then all of a sudden they were saying, well, maybe we need some guidelines for what regulations we should put into place in our museum now that we have an HVAC system. And so it was requested. And Gary said, well, given what these machines can do, this is probably what's to be expected. And then all of a sudden that was taken as the Bible. And then people put that in all over the world. And it was like, wait a second. But then it got, and then we started looking at the preventive conservation aspect of this. And now it's considered best practice. And this, of course, goes into questioning what best practice is, best for what and best for whom. And we have to start revaluing what we mean by best. Is it best for the object? But that's no longer okay, because we know that sustainability is got to be a win-win-win, where it's best for the object, best for people, and best for the planet. So
even if you're looking at it just on an object level,
yeah,
you have to think about not only the short-term risks, but also long-term risks, right?
Exactly.
And so, it's not best for that object if we have like a 3-degree change globally. One, because there won't be any humans left to appreciate it, but also the object
minor details.
Yeah, right. But the object itself will fall into disrepair.
Yeah, but it's also, that's so true, because of course, if we, we're already seeing the negative repercussions of climate change directly affecting our cultural heritage. I mean, all of the floods all over Europe. I mean, remember a couple of years ago when they had to evacuate the Louvre, and Venice is constantly having artworks that are just being washed away by floods. Coastal erosion threatening our built heritage. I mean, it's really direct now. I mean, we have no room to stand on anymore.
Florida, this is the precedent that is really scary for me, is Florida and California now, insurers have started to not renew premiums for collections based in Florida and California because of their natural disasters there. And they've said either we won't renew, or your deductible is going to be massive, or you need a disaster plan, or all three, or some combination thereof. And so we now have the precedent that insurers are starting to deny insurance related to natural disasters connected with the climate change. And that is a thing that is only going to increase over time. I'm sorry to say,
it's true. And it's not just that. I mean, there's so many things that I always say that, pardon my statement here, but I always say, we don't want to be caught with our pants down, but we're there now.
The
You know,
pants are
so
down.
for,
Yeah.
pants are down. I mean, for such a long time, it was, oh, well, there are no mandates yet. There are no regulations for it. We can still manage it. We'll just kind of keep going until we're forced to change. Well, guess what? We're forced to change now. And it's, and we feel fish out of water. We feel unprepared for it. And that's scary. But once again, the good news here, of course, is that we have the solutions for it. I have to say, I have just been absolutely blown away and so inspired. I was actually just on the phone with Daniel from Guggenheim Bilbao. And
Good.
yeah, love
He's
him.
great.
And he's going to be speaking at the conference.
Awesome.
And I've just been blown away by learning about not only what is actually really going on in the sector and what changes are being made and how impactful it's been in terms of savings, but what the opportunities are. I mean, my research has shown that, there was a publication in TU Delft that showed that just making changes in your relative humidity and temperature parameters can save up to 82% on your energy bill.
Wow.
82. I mean, most of the research says, 24 to 30. I've seen, basically it's usually around 20 to 60 is kind of a median, but they had some outliers at 82.
Amazing.
That's game changing. I mean, if you've got, a energy bill that's right now at 1 million a year and it's going up to 3 million now, and you're going to save 82%. Whew, you've got enough money to make all of the installations you need in order to make that happen.
Hire some conservators with that you had to sack years ago.
You can hire the museum staff with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Pay people a fair living wage. Oh my God, what a concept.
Yes, definitely. And you know what else? Probably those people that are making the biggest savings, I would guess, are the people that are living in, the global south, who have their little HVAC systems are working so much harder to try and make those parameters. And so, it's also a social justice issue, right? That, there are institutions that are paying ridiculous amounts to try and reach standards that are not even really appropriate for them in the first place.
Absolutely. And I think, it's not just that the standards aren't appropriate for them, but as you were saying, in terms of social justice, I mean, one of the things we say about international loans is we're trying to make art accessible. We're trying to send it to people who wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to travel somewhere else to see it. And, we're trying to connect cultures and things like that. But then you slap these loan agreement, ridiculous standards in place, and then half the museums in Africa are all of a sudden, not available because they don't have climate control in the first place.
Yeah.
And by the way, they're caring for their collections just fine. And the British Museum is more than happy to borrow things from them, but they're not going to send anything over there. And it's like,
despite the British Museum having leaks in their building.
Sorry, BM, we love you, but
sorry.
No, but it's really, it's just, to be honest with you, I think that we've just gotten into this situation where for so long, we've dragged our feet of like, this is just standard practice. This is the way it's done. And now all of a sudden we've been backed into a corner, and it's like, all right, well, we have two choices here. We can make some dramatic changes and we can face this and head on. We can, take the cover off. We can face our fears. We can make the change collectively, or basically we're going to become irrelevant. We're going to go bankrupt, and we're not going to be able to care for our collections anymore anyway, because at the standards we have, we can't pay our bills.
Yep.
So it's a fight or flight, and I choose to fight.
I am with you, Caitlin. I think that is the right choice. And yes, there may be some tough decisions. I mean, for example, lender agreements, I have now heard the precedent set of institutions. I spoke with the director at the World Art Foundation conference, Godfrey, of the Henry Moore Foundation, for example. And he has said, we have taken some really strong stances recently with our lender agreements, and we're not going to have loans for single items that are cross continents where it's just one venue. We're not going to do it anymore. It needs to be a minimum. It either needs to be a long-term loan of 3 years, or it needs to be multiple venues. But we can't justify sending things far away for a short period of time anymore.
And
So
but that's more related to the carbon footprint of the transportation, not
yes,
necessarily the climate control, right? Yeah.
correct. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is just, there's people are starting to review their policies. Lender agreements for climate controls is of course another important topic, and it's something where I've also heard other organizations are taking the stance of just saying, okay, well, if you won't agree to things being in a relaxed environment, then I'm afraid this loan is not going to proceed,
Mhm.
and so I
And
think
to be honest with you, I've also heard that that's not really something that people are arguing with. It's like, oh, okay, well, we can negotiate. Like it's not as scary as we make it seem. I think that
yeah.
what this is of course something we're going to talk about during the conference.
Mm.
But it's I think that it's mostly fear based in terms of, you don't want to risk. And as conservatives, we are very risk adverse. Like we are taught to be risk adverse. That is like, we have like risk aversion therapy is basically like our training.
Yeah. True.
And so, it's a scary thought to say like, okay, well, what if we can't, do exchanges with this museum because we can't live up to their guidelines? Well, guess what? That museum is probably not living up to their own guidelines. So
That happens a lot, and
it
yeah,
happens a lot. It happens a lot.
it
And
does.
you have one museum who's saying that we need these guidelines, and then you have 1,000 museums trying to keep up with those ridiculous guidelines. And once again, guidelines are guidelines. They're not there to be, they're not the Bible. They're not set in stone. They're not the end all be all. They are guidelines. And you also
Absolutely.
need to use your beautiful big brain and start putting critical thinking skills into place and say, okay, well, the guidelines are this, but considering the fact that we are in Australia in a desert environment, maybe we want to take our geographical location and the seasons into account and think a little bit strategically, because obviously as a conservator, I do know what is best for my collections, but I also know what's realistic. And it's about combining this idea of guidelines with practice. And that's what best
Absolutely.
practice is actually looking at individual situations, looking at individual objects, taking into account your environment, not just indoors, but outdoors, and not just in the UK, but where you are. And, asking why you're doing what you're doing and asking why you can't do it better.
I agree 100%. And another interesting point about this is people say to me all the time, "Oh, lender agreements, like our lenders won't let us do this to adopt these protocols." And I say to them, "So what does your lender agreement say then?" And they're all 100% of the time they're like, "I have no idea." I'm gonna go
Isn't
try.
that interesting? Yeah, but I think, as I said at the beginning, I think that this is also a transparency issue. So we sent out this survey, and I put the link in the chat, but I don't know, we don't have a chat.
The chat, put it in the Q&A if you
Okay,
can.
I'll get there. Maybe, did I see Moira was here? Moira, would you mind putting our survey link in the Q&A, please? Thank you. You're amazing. Nice to see you.
Activate the subtitles, please. Somebody is asking.
Oh, that's a good one. Thanks, Moira. Moira is our Key Futures coordinator at Key Culture, so very happy to have her here. So we did this survey, and basically, as I said, like one of the biggest issues is that we don't know what the situation is. So many times museums come to me and say, we would be very happy to put in less stringent conditions, but we need to see another museum who's done it. We want to make sure that this is okay to do. We want to, see how it's done. We don't want to be the first. That's always the scary thing. Of course, no one wants to be the first. So except for me, I always want to be the first. Get it over with. Teasing. Anyway, so the issue is, of course, that's not public information. Like nobody publishes on their website, these are our climate control protocols, unless it's the other way, where like we're incredibly proud of the fact that we have a 19-degree set point year round and we're maintaining that. And it's like, oh, that's not what we're going for. So the information is not public. So the first part, we're doing this, and I'd love to explain a little bit about. I keep referring to this conference. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second,
Please
if that's okay.
do. Yeah.
But we're doing this 4-part program, and I'll explain about it in just a minute. But my point is that the first part is the survey. And we set out this survey to collect information on what the current state of the art is in terms of climate control in museums. So we asked people, what guidelines they're using, who makes the decision, why you're using which guidelines or which ranges. And the results have been absolutely amazing. And I will be sharing those at the conference. But the thing that we noticed that was so fascinating is that the immediate feedback we got on the survey were corrections on the guidelines that we published. Everyone was emailing us saying, oh, no, this is actually this, or no, ASHRAE is this, or no, BISO is this. And it seems that there's not actually a consensus on what the guidelines really are. And so that was really scary, because I thought, okay, well, and then you look at these things, and like BISO, for example, they don't have a website. And we found the
No,
guidelines published on a blog post.
yeah.
And it's, there's
I
this
always refer to the
information.
National Museum Directors Council
Yeah.
webpage that talks about it, and that's what
Yeah,
I
it
usually.
talks about it, but and
Yes.
also like the IIC, ICOM-CC guidelines, like they don't actually, it's not guidelines, it's a declaration supporting more flexible conditions. But it does, like, we got an email from ICOM-CC saying, your publication, like what you have on the survey, is incorrect, so we changed it. But
Wow.
we just said to, are you going by the ICOM-CC guideline or a declaration, which is not actually clearly defining what the parameters are. So it's really interesting, because there's not even clarity about what the guidelines say, much less which guidelines to use. And of
Mhm.
course, what I'm always proponing is that it's not about picking a guideline. It's not about saying like, oh, we're going to do this or we're going to do this. It's about using our critical thinking skills, using our knowledge as conservators to choose what is best and makes the most sense for our collections, given our environment, given our location, given the season. And of course, we're going to have to make changes now based on climate change, because you had situations where, okay, it's November, so we're going to turn it down to 19, where it's still 30 degrees outside in Spain. There's no point in switching it down to 19 yet, because it's still bloody hot outside.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's, we have to be more aware of that we can't necessarily go by guidelines or our preconceived notions on seasons. It's changing, and we need to be reactive to new, the new climate.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Caitlin, tell us about this conference that's coming up.
Cool. All right, we'll do. So as I mentioned, we wanted to really look at how to approach this issue of climate control. And as I said, I think that it's very, very challenging if you're an individual institution to make changes and just go for it. There
Mhm.
are amazing institutions that have done that. They've taken this step, they've made the changes, they've addressed their loan agreements. You're going to hear all about them at the conference. But
Yeah.
overall, it is scary, and it's scary to do as an individual, because of course there's potential of repercussions.
Right.
So we wanted to approach this in the holistic, international, collective way that we like to approach everything at Key Culture. So we have put together this 4-part project called Getting Climate Control Under Control. And the first part of this was the survey. So we sent that around, and thank you, Moira, for sharing that. We sent that around in when was it? Beginning of October. So we've been collecting answers for about 6 weeks, and we'll continue to leave that open until the 1st of December. And the idea there, of course, is just to figure out what the situation is in terms of climate control and what the current state of the art is. Then the second part of this is we are creating a declaration, and this was Tony Segal's idea, and Tino Segal, sorry, and Tino wants to use his popularity for good cause, which I'm very grateful for. He has been an absolute, really a forerunner when it comes to sustainability, and he was one of the first ones to refuse to fly, and he's just been absolutely inspirational when it comes to practicing what you preach. And so Tino approached me at a conference in May, and he said, I want to do something about this, and I think we need to get people to sign on to it. So we're putting together a declaration. I think that's going to be going out on Monday, if I have time to review one last time tomorrow, which is basically saying, like, we understand that we have a footprint issue and we need to address it. So we are committing to addressing our climate control, and we are committing to changing our loan agreements. And then we're going to circulate that around, and Tino's going to use his influence to get lots of signatures. And of course, we'll be circulating that. Everyone's welcome to sign that. And then we're going to be publishing that in the New York Times, the Guardian, and the big publications. Make it a really public declaration.
Great.
That's going to be fantastic. In parallel, we are going to be hosting the International Climate Control Conference on the 1st and 2nd of December. And the idea behind this conference was really just to face our fears, get transparent, get clear about these issues, and talk openly and honestly about the issues that we have with this gigantic spider web of climate control. This is more of an event rather than a conference, so very informal in terms of the structure. If you guys have ever heard of the Climate Reality Project, which is Al Gore's initiative, they do, I think it's every quarter, they do the 24 hours of climate, where Al Gore hosts this event where they go for 24 straight hours, and every hour there's a different story about climate control, or about climate. I've got climate control in my mind. About climate change. So he'll say, like, now we'll go to Ryan Reynolds, who will talk about the importance of biodiversity. And then Ryan talks for an hour, and then he says, that's amazing. Thank you, Ryan. And now we're going to go to India to listen to the deputy director of energy talk about solar. And then we go to India and learn about that. So we're doing a similar format. I am going to sleep in between, but we're spanning 24 hours. And the idea is to really get clarity on what the situation currently is, what some of the hangups may be, what the guidelines are, and see some real case studies where things have happened. So the event is going to be kind of interspersed with different types of presentations. We have invited all of what I call the acronyms to come and present, so their guidelines. So I call them the acronyms. So BISA will be presenting, ASHRAE will be presented, IIC is presenting, ICOM is presenting, AICCM is presenting. I see that Pamela's on here. I'm talking with you and your team at AIC after this to hopefully get you guys to present as well. Super looking forward to that. And then we're also inviting kind of the leading experts from the preventive conservation side of the world to give keynotes. So Joel Taylor is presenting, Lucas Paratz is presenting, Dave Thickett is presenting, Gaël de Gauchamp is presenting. And then we're having panel sessions to address the different stakeholders. So we have a panel session with museum directors, one with facilities managers, one with insurance and legal counsel, and one with preventive conservation and risk assessment experts. And then interspersed, we have hot tips and we have case studies. And the case studies are from museums that have either made the change or didn't have climate control in the first place. So it's going to be really cool to see, such inspirational messaging. And I have to say, I've just been absolutely blown away at the amazing work that's already out there. And I'm hoping that we can continue to collect and showcase case studies even after this conference. And at the conference, the idea is really to leave people with a clearer sense of what's going on. So we're all on the same page about what guidelines are. We're all on the same page about what our roles and responsibilities are. We know the latest research, and the best scientific minds at hand have just told us what's going on and basically give us permission to make these changes. And then we're summing up with 2 tangible actions. At the end of the conference, we will be presenting the survey results. Then we will be presenting a template for a new loan agreement that can be adapted by any institution. You can, tailor it to what you need, but basically the idea is that it doesn't have the very stringent conditions for loans for climate control. And then on top of that, we'll be launching our pilot, which Annika was your idea. So very excited to be working together with you on this, and we'll be inviting 50 museums to join us to, to go through an 18-month project where we walk you through changing your climate control conditions.
Yay!
I'm so excited. This has been years in the making. And, thank you to Annika for thinking about doing this. And it's,
Absolutely. Thank you to you for getting it done.
That's what we do. But people come to me with ideas and we make them happen. All the brilliance is from out there. I just know the people to make it work. So,
well, that's a pretty important step.
But, no, and so that'll be really exciting. So we're inviting 50 museums, as I mentioned, to join us. And we're going to walk through, we're going to be using ArtEvolve condition reporting to make sure that we're all reporting in the same way. We're going to be using conserved data loggers.
Standardized data.
It's going to be great. We can compare apples and apples, which is hugely important.
Yeah, and cause and effect too. Together,
minor details. And then we're going to be using the key futures framework. So we're going to be providing training as well as coaching. Every participant will work with 2 coaches. We're going to work with a preventive conservation or sustainable preservation specialist in partner with an energy efficiency and building management specialist.
Awesome.
So we're going to tackle the kind of the front of house stuff, and then which is more, the relative humidity and the temperature ranges, and also the installations and the control settings. So we're going to look at energy efficiency on the back end. We're going to look at increasing our ranges on the front end. And I had a conversation with one of our coaches yesterday, and there's possibilities that we can cut carbon emissions in half during this pilot. So, and that's carbon emissions. That's not just energy efficiency. Energy efficiency, as I said, could be upwards, 60%, but carbon emissions in half, that's Paris Agreement right there.
There you go.
It's really cool. And it doesn't have to be something that requires, massive amounts of investments. A lot of it is just making sure that your systems are working together properly, that, you're putting the right settings in place, that you're
I'm so glad that you mentioned that. That is such an important point, that so many times, I can't even count the number of times that when I've talked about, climate controls and being more sustainable, so many people have leapt to the conclusion that what we're talking about here is a new building, tens of millions of dollars or pounds needed for a new building. And I'm like, oh, no. No,
but that's actually, the most sustainable building is the one that's already been built. The fact of the matter is that's a Carl always says that, but the fact of the matter is that sustainability has a bad rep. It's always thought that sustainability means compromise or it means more expensive, but that's not the case ever. Sustainability is always more financially interesting, even if that's long-term thinking. But guess what, guys? As conservators, aren't we long-term thinkers anyway?
Right.
Like, shouldn't we apply that to our practices outside of off the bench?
Absolutely.
It's about shifting our focus and thinking about like, okay, maybe right now we need to invest X amount of money, but it's going to pay itself off in probably it'll probably pay itself off within a month with the energy crisis right now. And, energy bills tripling. But it's really long-term thinking we need to be focusing on. And
what? Again, we need to practice what we preach, because this is what we're saying about sustainability, again, to kind of put it in a global perspective. Like, how many times have we said, well, the huge crux of the matter is with sustainability that everyone is so short-term focused. They all care about quarterly shareholders reports and dividends, right? And that's the root of all the evil of why we're in this mess. It's because of all the short-term thinking. Well, we can apply that to our own industry very easily.
Oh, well, 100%. The problem that we have that I find so often is that as a sector, we are financially unsustainable. We are relying on public funding, which is drying up. And by the way, is now going towards whatever war, pandemic, or climate disaster we need to relief from. And so as the cultural sector, we have to become relevant, but we also have to become sustainable ourselves, so that it's very difficult to be environmentally sustainable or socially sustainable if we're not financially sustainable. Once again, it goes back to the big gigantic web, but we have to start somewhere. And I think a very easy step right now is to start with climate control, energy efficiency, and save a ton of money this year so that we can put that into more jobs, and we can put that into more retrofits so we can save even more money. And then we can start looking at, being more creative with our financial models and our business models.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden we're in this situation where we're leaders for sustainability, not only in what we're preaching, but what we're practicing. And then we're relevant for our communities because we're leaders in sustainability. All of a sudden, we're not part of the budget cuts because we're an integral part of society that is focused on sustainability. I mean, what was I find so interesting, and this is total tangent, and I know we're running out of time here, but when COVID happened in Europe and North America, museums shut their doors. Lots of places in the world, museums shut their doors. In Africa, they opened them because they became, cultural centers, or they became community centers because they had other things that they were offering besides just collections. They were offering health services, they were offering, support systems. And I think that, this is the future, but it starts with what can we do today? And right now, the conversation is about climate control. The conversation is about the energy crisis. What can we do? We can save ourselves some money. We can be publicly, vocal about our carbon footprint. We can make sure that we reinforce the trust that the public has in us by being transparent about it, by us starting these conversations instead of waiting for someone to point the finger at us. By the way, I was on the phone with a reporter from the New York Times a couple weeks ago who's doing a story on this. So we don't want to be the ones who all of a sudden, we don't want to be like, oh, someone else is calling us out on it. Now we need to make changes. No. We need to be the first ones to speak up. Otherwise, we're going to lose our credibility.
Absolutely. And you know what? The Brooklyn Museum of Art, they were a community center.
Huge. They're part of the Key Futures program, by the way.
Oh, well, good.
We love them. I mean, we loved them before. When they joined, I was just like, I told them, I was like, I've been, kind of stalking you guys for a long time, wanting to get you on this program because they just do such amazing work.
Absolutely.
And especially with decolonization and social issues, it's really inspirational. But this is the thing, like, let's be vocal about it. Let's share with each other. Let's support each other. And I think that comes down to, the climate control thing. Let's support each other. Let's not hold each other down by making our artworks inaccessible so that other people can't have it unless they maintain these unrealistic standards. Let's treat each other as human beings.
Absolutely.
and
especially when you think about, colonialism and the fact that, it's again, colonial collections telling people that might even be the people that originally owned these things, you can't have these things back because you can't produce a climate like a cave in Wiltshire. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever, and it's very unjust. And so it's really, and again, like so many things in sustainability in general, going back to the global picture, as you know very well, like so many times when you're dealing with sustainability matters, you're also dealing with social justice matters at the same time. They're like
sustainability, if you're, is not interchangeable with climate change. Sustainability is social justice and climate justice. So that's an important point, because a lot of times when people say sustainability, they're just referring to climate, but that's not the case. We're talking the full spectrum, and social justice is climate justice. Climate justice is social justice. 100%. You're absolutely right.
So we're almost at time, and
it always goes way too fast. I feel like we could do this for another 3 episodes, and we have so many different tangents we can talk about. Sorry, everyone.
Totally. And
too much to talk about.
No, we absolutely should keep it going, because you don't create change by talking about things once, right? You have to kind of keep hammering home the thing again and again and again. So sorry, guys. But yes, expect us to probably be talking about these things some more in the future. But so I am just going to read out a couple of the Q&A things. If anybody wants to ask a question, please do it now in the Q&A section. And I also, just before I do that, want to very quickly share a positive and hopeful thing that I've become aware of in the sustainability sector, just as a feel-good finish to the hour. which is that, so I recently won an award. Thank you very much.
Oh, congratulations.
For ESG Entrepreneurship World Cup UK Finals. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank
Very
you.
well deserved. Doesn't surprise me in the least.
Not, and the reason I'm mentioning this is that's not the feel good thing. The feel good thing is that I co-won it with another organization, which I want to share about to everyone here, which is amazing. It was a woman, UK-based company. She's a scientist and she has invented an adhesive using food waste to replace formaldehyde in engineered wood. Mic drop, boom, wow.
That's amazing. That
Isn't
is
it?
absolutely amazing.
So engineered wood, everyone, meaning all of the plywood, all of the chipboard, all of the MDF, all of the flat pack furniture, all of the temporary walls, crates, so many things. All of that is not recyclable. 100% of it that's ever been made in the world ever gets into landfill. The average lifespan of flat pack furniture is 4 years before it ends up in landfill. And it's got toxic formaldehyde in it. And guess what? This stuff is totally circular, totally biodegradable, amazing, and is not off-gassing toxic fumes on the way during its life cycle. So I just want to share that with everyone. And when we send out the recording of this, I will see if we can also include, if Emma can help include a link to this woman and her company that is doing this, because she was really hoping that the art world would help her kind of raise the profile of her new invention before she gets the supply chain together in order to meet all of the needs of the world and its engineered wood. And so I think this would be a fantastic space for us all to, engage with, because who can say no to not having formaldehyde in their engineered wood, right? So that's super exciting, and something I just wanted to quickly share. So I'm just going to read one of the comments here from Sam Johnson. Completely hear you about the hypocrisy in setting conditions for loans being stricter than those in your own museum or gallery. I work for a historic house and our conditions aren't anywhere near the same as for loan. But I always reconciled it by thinking about the stability, and the problem with lending is taking an object outside of its stable environment. I'm not a conservator and not studied in conservation. So would be interested to hear your conservation expertise on this point. Well, Sam, Caitlin can comment on her end, but what I can tell you is that an easy solution to that is to plan in allowing something to sit in a crate for a week or two so that it can acclimatize into the new environment that it's being sent to. So there is a simple solution to that issue, but it's a good point to bring up.
It's about avoiding drastic fluctuations. And what's so interesting is that, of course, drastic fluctuations can happen when you ship something via plane. I think we have a second point for, train or freight or ship freight, but it's, once again, you need to figure out, okay, what is the climate that it's going to, where is it coming from, what type of object is it? Let's think a little bit more strategically about what the risks are. Is it a wooden object that's all of a sudden going from a environment where you've got 60% relative humidity to an environment where you've got 20? Yeah, that might be an issue. So then you need to think about, as Annika was saying, how you're going to acclimatize it. But if it's an object that's, stone and it's going from 60% to 20%, that doesn't matter. Right. So yeah. It's once again, I think when it comes to sustainability, and this is across the board, but especially for us as conservators, we need to stop thinking about blanket statements. We need to stop thinking about following guidelines blindly. We need to take them into consideration, but we need to use our brains. We need to think critically about, okay, what is actually the situation? What makes the most sense here? How can we solve this issue? It's not necessarily about saying, okay, the solution is for you guys to make sure that you reach our loan agreements, because that's the only solution. There are more solutions. So let's think creatively and think outside the box and start using our brains and our creative minds to come up with solutions that work for the planet, for people, and for the object.
Absolutely. And, probably what we need are some easy to use cheat sheets which maybe Keith culture can create for, situate, if it's stone, don't worry. If it's wood, do this, if it's paper, do that. And that might be really helpful for those that don't have conservation training, but are trying to be, critical and look at things on a case-by-case basis, which is really what we need moving forward. So the final thing I'm going to read is from Jim Minsky, who's saying, Armory Levins, a longtime energy expert, has conducted research on and written about energy efficiency and renewables. He has been pushing energy efficiency and converting to renewables for a long time. One of his books is Reinventing Fire. He says the key barrier to success is not inadequate technology, but tardy adoption. So yes, it is, and I would go so far as to also add that the key barrier is the continued support by governments of subsidizing fossil fuels, right? Because if you look at renewables from a free market point of view, they are already much better, superior to fossil fuels in terms of their cost. The renewable electricity is the cheapest form of electricity, generally speaking, nowadays, which is fantastic. But petrol has been cheap in America, and as has fossil fuels in general, because they're still subsidized by the government. And I mean, it's not only in America, but just as an example. So yeah, but thank you, Jim, for sharing that. And I think it's a good point. And I'm just checking, I think those are all of the things in there that I have to share. So we're going to close there. I know that you had a hard stop, Caitlin, so thank you for going a little bit over time.
Thank you to Pamela and your colleagues. I'll be there in just a second.
Thank you all. And so with that, we bid you adieu. I'm very excited for your conference and for the subsequent program that will follow thereafter. I think that it's going to be a really fantastic event and program. And I'm so excited to see some progress in this area. It's very, very exciting and good to know. I think, we can all take some solace and some hope in remembering the fact that, the solutions are there. We can work together, and this goes for the benzoate or the green protocols in climate control, but also other, topics of sustainability in this area. We are, lots of us, developing expertise and a strong network, and we're here to help, and we can do this.
Love it. Thank you, Annika, so much for having me. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Caitlin. Good night.